My cheating girlfriend falsely accused me of assault. My family instantly abandoned me. The life I had, the one I spent 21 years meticulously building, was demolished in the space of 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That's how long it took to read the email thread. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the air outside carrying the first real chill of autumn. I was in the apartment I shared with my girlfriend Isabel, finishing a late-night study session for my architecture finals. My laptop had died, and I'd borrowed hers to look up a quick reference on Bauhaus design principles. That's when I saw it, an unread email from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line was just, "Last night. Curiosity is a treacherous thing. I should have ignored it. I should have closed the laptop and walked away, preserving the beautiful, fragile lie of my existence for a few more hours." But I clicked, and there it was, a string of messages between Isabel and a man named Mark. They weren't just flirty, they were brutally, graphically descriptive. They talked about nights spent together in hotel rooms while I was at the university library, about the thrill of their secret, about the things they'd done in our bed. The final email, the one that had just arrived, read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. He's a fool. He has no idea." I wasn't breathing. The air in my lungs had turned to glass. The world, which had been a solid, well-designed structure just moments before, began to liquefy around me. The clean lines of our apartment, the Scandinavian furniture we'd picked out together, the framed architectural prints on the wall, the soft glow of the lamp on Isabel's desk, all of it seemed to ripple and distort, as if I were looking at it from the bottom of a well. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears, a sound I would come to know intimately over the next few years. I was Alex, a 21-year-old architecture student. I had a loving girlfriend, a respectable family, a bright future, and in the space of 3 minutes and 47 seconds, I had become a fool. Our life, or the life I thought we had, was a picture of upper-middle-class aspiration. My father was a partner at a law firm, my mother a respected member of several local charity boards. We weren't obscenely wealthy, but we were comfortable, our existence defined by a quiet, relentless pressure to maintain appearances. Isabel fit into that world perfectly. She was beautiful, intelligent, and came from a similar background. My mother adored her. She saw Isabel as the perfect future daughter-in-law, a woman who would solidify our family's social standing. "She's a reflection on you, Alex," my mother would say. "On all of us." Isabel was woven so deeply into the fabric of my family that I couldn't distinguish where she ended and I began. We spent holidays with her parents. Our families had dinner together once a month. Our lives were a shared blueprint, the foundation already poured for a future everyone had agreed upon. When she came home an hour later, humming a cheerful tune as she hung up her coat, I was still sitting at her desk, the laptop screen glowing in the dark room. "Alex, what are you doing sitting in the dark?" she asked, her voice light. Then she saw my face. The cheerfulness evaporated. "What's wrong?" I didn't say anything. I just turned the laptop screen towards her. I watched her face cycle through a lifetime of emotions in a few seconds. First, confusion, then dawning, horrified recognition, then a flash of pure animal panic. Her first instinct was to lie. "That's not. My friend was using my laptop. That must be..." The words stumbled and died in her throat as she saw the futility of it. The quiet in the room was a physical thing. It pressed in on us, heavy and suffocating. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. My voice a dry, rasping thing I didn't recognize as my own. I don't know," she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. It was the classic Isabel defense. the one I had seen her use 100 times to get out of trouble. The flood of tears, the damsel in distress. But for the first time, it had no effect on me. The part of my heart that would have normally ached for her was a cold, dead stone. How long? I asked. 6 months, she choked out between sobs. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Every I love you, every shared meal, every night spent in our bed was a performance. The scale of the deception was so vast, I couldn't comprehend it. I felt a surge of cold, clean rage. I stood up and walked to my room, pulling a duffel bag from the closet. "What are you doing?" she cried, following me. "Alex, please, we can talk about this. It was a mistake. I love you." "No, you don't," I said, my voice flat. "You love the idea of me. You love the life we were supposed to have, but you don't love me." I started throwing clothes into the bag. My hands were shaking. It was then that I saw the look in her eyes change. The panic and the feigned remorse receded, replaced by something else, something cold and reptilian. It was the look of a cornered animal, calculating its final, desperate attack. She saw the blueprint of her perfect future, the respectable marriage, the social standing, my family's approval, all turning to ash, and she made a decision. She decided to burn me to the ground to save herself. "If you walk out that door," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of tears, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, "I will ruin you. I will ruin your entire life. If you tell anyone about this, I will tell them you assaulted me. I will tell them you forced me. Who do you think they'll believe, Alex? You or me?" I stopped packing and just stared at her, a chill seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I saw the abyss open up in front of me, but I was too arrogant, too naive to believe she could actually push me in. The truth was my shield. I had the emails. I had the truth. "You're bluffing," I said, and zipped up my bag. I walked out of the apartment, out of our life, and into the end of the world. I drove to my parents' house, the duffel bag, a lead weight on the passenger seat. I needed them. For the first time in years, I truly, desperately needed my family. I rehearsed the words in my head, how I would explain the inexplicable. I stumbled up to the door and rang the bell. My mother answered. The look on her face was not one of concern, but of pure, unadulterated disgust. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "Mom, something's happened. With Isabel. Isabel just called me," she said, her voice like ice. "She told me everything. How could you? After everything we've done for you, to raise you in this home. You are a monster." It took me a moment to understand. She had done it. She had gotten to them first. My key didn't work in the lock. They had already deadbolted it against me. My father appeared behind her, his face pale and grim. "Your mother's right, Alex. Don't come back here." The door closed in my face. I stood on the porch of my childhood home, a trespasser. My own family had disowned me based on a 3-minute phone call. The police were waiting for me when I got back to my apartment. 2 uniformed officers stood by their cruiser, their faces impassive. Isabel had called them too. The questions were a blur, my answers choked and incoherent. They took me to the station. They put me in a small, sterile room that smelled of bleach and despair. I was fingerprinted. My picture was taken. I was placed in a holding cell. The heavy steel door clanged shut, a sound of absolute finality. I slid down the wall onto the cold concrete floor and stared at the ceiling, the high-pitched ringing in my ears, now a deafening roar. I was released 12 hours later. "No evidence to support the complainant's claim," the detective said, handing me my things in a plastic bag. The story she gave had inconsistencies, but I'd advise you to stay far away from her. I walked out of the police station into the grey morning light, feeling like I had aged 100 years. I hadn't been proven innocent. I had just not been proven guilty. I made my one phone call from a payphone to my parents, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. My father answered. "They let me go," I said, my voice cracking. "There was no evidence. It was all a lie, Dad." She lied. There was a long pause. Then his voice came, flat and dead. "The police getting it wrong doesn't make you innocent, Alex. The damage is done. Your mother is devastated. Stay away from this family." He hung up. I stood there on the street corner, the receiver in my hand, listening to the dial tone. I had been accused, arrested, disowned, and abandoned by everyone I had ever loved. My college had already emailed, barring me from campus pending their own investigation. My friends weren't answering my calls. I was 21 years old, and my life was over. I was a fool, and I was utterly, completely alone. I started walking, with no destination in mind, just a desperate need to put distance between myself and the smoking crater of my life. That's when my phone buzzed with a text. It was my best friend, Ben, the only person who hadn't been poisoned. I don't believe her. I'm on my way. It was the only flicker of light in a universe of darkness. The buzz of my phone in my pocket was a phantom limb, a sensation I'd imagined 100 times in the suffocating silence of the holding cell. For a moment, I didn't believe it was real. In the dreamlike, hollowed-out state I was in, it felt more plausible that I was hallucinating human contact. But it buzzed again. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. Ben's name glowed on the screen, a lighthouse in an infinite black ocean. I don't believe her. I'm on my way. The words were a rope thrown into the abyss. I didn't know how deep the abyss was, or if the rope would hold, but it was the only thing there. I texted him my address, the address to the apartment that was no longer mine, and sank down onto the curb outside the police station, the rising sun offering no warmth against the profound, internal cold that had settled deep in my bones. Ben arrived 20 minutes later in his beat-up Honda Civic, a car held together by duct tape and stubborn optimism. He got out, took one look at my face, the exhaustion, the wild, haunted look in my eyes, and didn't say a word. He just pulled me into a hug, a fierce, solid embrace that was the first moment of human warmth I had felt in what felt like a lifetime. I didn't cry. I was too far beyond tears. I just stood there, a hollowed-out statue, and let him hold me up. He drove me to his tiny, cluttered one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It smelled of old books, coffee, and the faint, reassuring scent of oil paint from his hobby canvases. He sat me down on his lumpy sofa, put a steaming mug of tea in my hands, and made me eat a piece of toast, which felt like swallowing gravel. Only then did he speak. "Talk to me, Alex," he said, his voice soft. "Tell me everything." And so I did. The story came out in a torrent, a fractured, incoherent narrative of the emails, the confrontation, Isabel's cold, calculated threat, the closed door of my parents' house, the clang of the cell door. I told him about my father's final words on the phone. "The damage is done." Ben listened patiently, his gaze never wavering, his expression hardening into a cold fury as my story unfolded. When I was finished, a ragged, empty silence filled the room. "She's a sociopath," Ben said finally, the words a quiet, firm judgment. "And your parents—" "Alex, I'm so sorry. I don't have words for that." "There aren't any," I whispered. "What do I do, Ben? My life, it's gone. My degree, my family, my friends, everything." "No," he said, leaning forward, his eyes intense. "She torched the house, man, but you got out. The foundation is still there. Me, I'm here. You're staying with me for as long as it takes. We'll figure this out." For the next 3 days, I existed in a fog, adrift in the strange, safe harbour of Ben's apartment. He handled everything. He deflected the barrage of hateful texts from numbers I didn't recognise. He spoke to the university administration, confirming that I was indefinitely suspended, pending a formal hearing that would likely end in my expulsion. He let me sleep, and when I wasn't sleeping, I was staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last few days, trying to understand how a life could be unwritten so quickly. On the 4th day, I made the mistake of thinking I could face the world. I just wanted to feel normal, to walk outside and not feel like a ghost. I borrowed a hoodie from Ben and went to a small, anonymous coffee shop a few blocks away. The moment I walked in, the quiet hum of conversation faltered. A girl who had been in one of my seminars saw me. Her eyes widened in a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, and she quickly turned her back, whispering to her friend. The barista, a guy I vaguely knew, suddenly couldn't meet my eyes, his hands fumbling with my order. I could feel their stares like a physical weight, the air thick with their judgment. I was a leper. The accusation was a bell tied around my neck, announcing my impurity wherever I went. I left the coffee on the counter and walked out, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. That night, the full weight of my situation crushed me. I was a pariah. There was no clearing my name. The lack of evidence wasn't proof of innocence. It was just a technicality, a lucky break for a monster. My name, Alex Vance, was now synonymous with something vile. I would never get a job in this city. I would never have a normal life here again. In a last desperate act of hope, I tried to call my brother, James. We had never been close. He was older, already married and living in a different city, but he was blood. He was always the more level-headed one, the one who saw our mother's favoritism for what it was. I thought, prayed, that he might be a voice of reason. I dialed his number. It rang once, then went to a clipped, automated message. The number you have dialed has blocked your call. That was it. That was the final blow. Even James, my own brother. I didn't know then that our mother, in her scorched earth campaign to erase me, had gone onto the family phone plan she still paid for, and blocked my number from his phone without his knowledge. All I knew in that moment was the profound, gut-wrenching finality of total abandonment. I told Ben what had happened. He swore a string of vicious, creative curses aimed at my entire family. Then he sat down opposite me, his expression grim. "Okay," he said. "So the old life is a total loss. We need a new plan, a radical one." And so we began to plot my escape. It felt like planning a prison break. Ben sat with me late into the night, his laptop glowing, a bottle of cheap whiskey between us. We looked at maps. We looked at bus routes. We looked at job listings for cash-in-hand work in cities I had never heard of. The plan was simple and brutal. I had to disappear. "You need a new name, a new identity," Ben said, his voice low and serious. "Alex Vance is dead. We have to bury him." The next day, we executed the plan. Ben drove me to my old apartment. The landlord, a kind, elderly man who looked at me with pity, had agreed to let me in for 1 hour to clear out my things. We worked in silence, packing my life into cardboard boxes, my architecture books, my drafting tools, my clothes. Everything else, the furniture, the life I had shared with Isabel, I left behind. It felt like packing up the belongings of a dead man. We put the boxes in a storage unit Ben rented for me under his name. Then we went to the bank. I closed my account, withdrawing all my remaining funds, a few $1,000s that felt like both a pittance and a king's ransom. This was my survival stake. From there, we went to a cheap electronics store. I bought a burner phone, a simple, untraceable flip phone. The final step was the hardest. Back at Ben's apartment, I took out my smartphone, the device that held the last digital ghosts of my former life. I scrolled through the photos one last time. Me and Isabel smiling on a beach, a picture of my family at a long ago Christmas, a stupid selfie with Ben. It was all a lie, all of it. With a deep, shuddering breath, I performed a factory reset, wiping the phone clean until it was nothing more than a blank, anonymous piece of glass and metal. I took out the SIM card and snapped it in two. Alex Vance was dead. He didn't even leave a body. That night, Ben drove me to the Greyhound station. It was after midnight, the station a dingy, liminal space, filled with lost souls and people running from something. Ben pressed a thick envelope of cash into my hand, his own savings. "Don't argue," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You'd do it for me. Pay me back when you're a millionaire architect." We stood under the buzzing fluorescent lights, two friends at the end of the world. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, looking at the departure board, a list of cities that all seemed like alien planets. "West, I guess. I'll buy a ticket for the next bus that leaves, wherever it's going." He pulled me into one last fierce hug. "Don't be a stranger, you hear me? Use the new phone. Let me know you're alive." "I will," I promised, though I wasn't sure if it was a promise I could keep. I walked away without looking back. I bought a one-way ticket to a city in a state I'd only ever seen on a map. I got on the bus, found a seat by a dirty window, and pulled the hood of my sweatshirt over my head. As the bus pulled out of the station, its air brakes hissing like a dying breath, I watched the familiar city lights blur and fade until they were just a faint, sickly glow against the dark horizon. I was a ghost, leaving the scene of my own murder, my only possession, a duffel bag, a burner phone, and an unmarked grave where my heart used to be. The bus ride was a 27-hour journey through a grey, featureless purgatory. I didn't sleep. I just stared out the dirty window as the manicured suburbs of my old life bled into the flat, anonymous heartland of the country. I watched the names of towns I'd never heard of flash by on green highway signs, each one a step further into the abyss. When the bus finally hissed to a stop in the cavernous, echoing terminal, the sign on the wall read, "Cleveland, Ohio." It might as well have been the moon. I got off, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and stepped out into a city that felt forged from iron and indifference. The air didn't smell like the crisp, clean autumn I'd left behind. It was heavy with the metallic tang of industry and the damp chill of the lake. The sky was a low, bruised ceiling of grey clouds. I walked for hours, a ghost amidst a sea of strangers, my face hidden in the shadow of my hoodie. The city wasn't hostile, it was something worse, utterly indifferent. No one looked at me, no one cared who I was or where I was going. In my old life, I had been someone, a son, a student, a boyfriend, and then a monster. Here, I was nothing. The anonymity I had craved felt less like freedom and more like being erased. Ben had given me $1,000, a staggering sum that was the entirety of his savings. It felt like a sacred trust, and the thought of wasting a single cent of it filled me with a paralyzing fear. My first night was spent in a rundown motel by the interstate, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. The floral bedspread was thin and stained, the lock on the door was flimsy, and every passing truck on the highway sounded like an approaching threat. I lay on the lumpy mattress, fully clothed, and stared at the water-stained ceiling, my mind a relentless slideshow of horrors, Isabel's cold eyes, my mother's disgusted face, the clang of the cell door. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The next few weeks were a brutal education in survival. I learned that hunger is a physical, gnawing ache that eclipses all other thoughts. I learned that the city's homeless shelters were crowded, dangerous places, where a moment of inattention could cost you your meager possessions. I learned that the only thing worse than being looked at with hatred is not being looked at all. I was a ghost, invisible to the world. My days were spent walking, trying to find cash-in-hand work, any work. I was turned away from construction sites, from restaurant kitchens, from warehouses, without a local address, without references, without a believable story. I was unemployable. The $1,000 from Ben was dwindling at an alarming rate. Rock bottom came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I'd arrived. I was down to my last $40. I hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. I was sitting in a small, bleak park, watching the world go on without me, when the full weight of my despair finally settled on me. They had won. Isabel, my parents, they hadn't just ruined my life, they had deleted it. There was no way back. The thought of ending it all, of simply stepping off a bridge into the cold grey river, was not a dramatic impulse. It was a calm, logical consideration. It felt like the only practical solution to an unsolvable problem. What stopped me was a memory, a flash of Ben's face at the bus station, the look of fierce, desperate hope in his eyes. I couldn't betray his faith, the only faith anyone had left in me. With the last of my energy, I walked to a dingy temp agency for day labourers I'd seen earlier, a place I had avoided because it looked like the last stop for broken men. It was, and I was one of them. The man behind the plexiglass window didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Name?" he grunted. "Alex Vance," I said, the name tasting like poison in my mouth. He scribbled it on a list. "Be here tomorrow, 5 a.m. sharp. Bring your own boots. You miss the truck, you don't get paid." The next morning, in the pre-dawn darkness, I stood in a crowd of weary, silent men and was herded onto an old school bus. It drove us to a sprawling, monolithic factory on the edge of the city, a hulking beast of brick and steel that belched smoke into the perpetually grey sky. This was my introduction to the machine. The work was grueling, mind-numbing, and deafening. I stood on an assembly line for 10 hours. My task to ensure a small metal widget was correctly seated in a larger component as it moved past me every 7 seconds. The noise of the machinery was a physical assault, a constant roaring clang and hiss that vibrated through the soles of my boots and up into my skull. But the noise was a strange kind of blessing. It was so loud it drowned out the voices in my head. For 10 hours a day, I wasn't thinking about Isabel, or my parents, or the life I had lost. I was thinking only of the widget, of the 7-second rhythm, of the simple, mechanical task. The line foreman was a gruff, older man named Frank, with a face like a roadmap of every bad decision he'd ever made. He didn't speak to me for the first week, just watched me with cynical, tired eyes. At the end of my shift on Friday, as he handed me my meagre cash pay in a small brown envelope, he grunted, "You're quiet, and you show up on time. See you Monday." It was the closest thing I'd had to a compliment in months. The factory became my life. I worked 6 days a week, taking every hour of overtime I could get. The physical exhaustion was a mercy. It allowed me to sleep. I moved from the motel to a single, tiny room in a boarding house, a depressing box with a shared bathroom at the end of the hall. But it was a place to lock a door. I saved every dollar I could, my small cash hoard growing slowly, a testament to my endurance. The decision came on a Saturday, 4 months into my new life. I was at the public library, the only place I went for recreation, using their computers. I was filling out a form for a community college catalogue, just to see if there was a path back to the world of thought and design. I typed my name into the box. Alex Vance. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stared at the name on the screen. It wasn't me. Alex Vance was a ghost. He was the name of a promising student, a beloved son, a loving boyfriend. That person was dead. His name was now the property of a monster, a label they had attached to a crime that never happened. To carry his name was to carry his grave. To build a future, as Alex Vance, would be like trying to build a skyscraper on a sinkhole. The foundation was utterly, irrevocably compromised. I realized then what I had to do. It wasn't a whim. It was a moment of absolute, chilling clarity. I had to kill Alex Vance for good. The process of legally changing my name was a journey through a labyrinth of impersonal bureaucracy. I spent days at the county courthouse, filling out forms, getting fingerprinted again this time as a free man, and paying the fees from my hard-earned cash. I needed a new name. I spent a week on it, writing possibilities on scraps of paper in my small room. I wanted something that felt solid, something that felt real. I chose Elias Thorne. Elias was a name that felt like it had history, a name that could have belonged to my shipwright grandfather. It was strong, classic, and most importantly, it was not Alex. The surname was just as deliberate. Thorne. It was the pain, the spiky, protective barrier I had built around my heart. It was a reminder of the thorns I had to crawl through to get here. It was my armor. The day the final court order came in the mail was not a day of celebration. I stood in my bleak little room and held the document, my new name printed in official blocky letters, Elias Thorne. It felt strange, like trying on a new man's coat. It was somber, a quiet personal funeral for the boy I used to be. I was no longer a ghost. I was a new man, born in a factory, baptized in a courthouse. That evening, Elias Thorne took his first real step toward a future. I walked to the sprawling brick campus of the local state university, a place that had seemed as distant and unattainable as the moon just months ago. I walked into the admissions office and picked up a course catalogue for the School of Architecture. Back in my room, under the light of a single bare bulb, I opened the catalogue. The pages were filled with blueprints, with theories of structure and form, with the language of creation. For the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, the roaring in my head was quiet, replaced by the whisper of a possibility. The foundation of my old life was a pile of rubble, but here, in my hands, was a blueprint for a new one.